The next step that I want to take with programming this Minesweeper application is to create the interface. Now, I've got the program running on screen here, and if we take a look at the interface, it's made up of three sort of main components. One is a title label across the top where it just says Minesweeper there. The second simple one is just a new game button down at the bottom. Again, really straightforward, just a button, says new game on it, runs the new game code. And then the more detailed part that we have to take a little bit of a deeper look at in terms of this lesson is how do I make this whole big grid of buttons all over the place, right? This is the 15 by 15 grid of buttons that becomes the game itself. How do I lay out that array into my program without doing a lot of hard coding for the location of every single button? There's got to be a better way than that, right? So that's what we're going to be looking at in this video.
Okay, so I've popped back over into Eclipse here, and I've got my Minesweeper class open, ready to edit. Now, remember, I made a array of button objects that I called Minefield buttons, and it's made into a 15 by 15 array for button objects. I've made the array, but I haven't made the actual buttons yet. That's one of the tasks that we're going to have to take care of. So remember, in a JavaFX program, all of the layout for the interface gets done in the start method of the program. That's what we're going to be working on in this video, the start method. Right now, the start method, all it does is show the primary stage. Not very interesting. We've got to lay out the parts of the screen. So there was three main parts to the screen. So I need the title label itself. I need the new button, our new game button. I might as well just do that second because, again, very simple, straightforward thing to implement. And then the last part is, okay, I need to make that grid of buttons for the game Minefield. All right, so that's the last part that I'll be focusing on, how we lay that out. For the title label, very simple. All I did was use a label. In fact, I just called it title, and it's a new label that says Minesweeper on it. And that was pretty much it. I made it using the Playbill font. Of course, you can use whatever font you want. And I happen to use size 50. So if I want this to look kind of the same as the one that I had on screen a minute ago, that's what I got to use. Okay, and the second thing is making that new game button. Again, really straightforward. I just made a button. In fact, I'll call it new game, and it's a new button that says new game on it. Nothing real groundbreaking here. I already have a method in my program called new game, so I might as well set the action up for this button as well. It's not going to do anything because the method doesn't do anything yet, but set on action. And when the event of the button being pressed happens, then what do I need to do? I need to call the new game method. Right, if I look at it down in my program, I should be able to find new game method. And it is right there. I'll implement the code for that in a later video, but the method is there. The button will call it. I just won't do anything yet. Okay, now the slightly trickier part. How do we set up and lay out that whole grid, 225 buttons, right? 15 by 15, without writing a ton of code in order to do it? I mean, there's going to be some lines of code, obviously, but I don't want to have to do more than I need to. JavaFX includes a great layout manager for laying out a two-dimensional grid like this, and in fact, it's called the grid pane. So I'm going to make a grid pane called, I'll just call it grid, create a new grid pane. Now the grid pane is a layout tool that helps me lay things out in a grid formation like I want to lay out the Minesweeper stuff. So what I'll do is I'll make each button for the array, and then I'll add it to the grid pane. Now, I don't want to make each button one by one. I want to use loops to do that. So okay, so I'm going to write the same sort of loop that I wrote before. Integer column is equal to 0, and column is less than how many my game expects. This is a good place to say, it seems a little weird, I don't know, to me, to be talking about columns first and then rows. Oftentimes when I talk about things, I would say the row first and then the column. But the reason that I'm doing that is JavaFX in a lot of places, and especially on this grid pane here, takes the column as the first argument and the row as the second argument in all of its methods. I think the reason that it does that is because if you think about it, column is the left-right part of the coordinates of the button that I'm going to put on the grid, and row is the up-down coordinates. And so to make it match with anything else where we're putting in the left and then top of like say a rectangle or something like that, when we're laying anything out, we always say the left right part first, and then we say the up down part. I think that's why they've gone with the convention, say the column first and then the row number. So I know it takes a little bit of getting used to, but there's nothing about the array in particular that says what the first index refers to and what the second index refers to. In this program, I'm using column as the first index, row as the second index to match up with the way that JavaFX does things. Now you notice, of course, label is underlined because I haven't imported it. Let's just do that right away so that I'm not seeing errors. Same thing with grid pane, hasn't been imported. It's a JavaFX scene layout class, so I want to import that. Okay, good. No more errors on my screen. So what am I doing here? I'm setting up the Minefield buttons array. So the first thing I want to do is go to the Minefield buttons array at column row, and I want to make a new button there. So new button for that spot, and just a basic button. I actually don't want them to say anything on them or display anything at first, right? And later on in the game, maybe that'll change, but at first, I just want a basic button. I'm going to do a little bit of formatting for those buttons as well. How big do I want my screen to become? Depends a little bit on how big I make each button. And I found that a nice size for each button was to set the preferred size at 30 pixels by 30 pixels, a little square. Eventually, they're going to have numbers on them, and I'd like those numbers to just appear in the middle. So to make that happen, I'm doing Minefield buttons at the one that I've just created, and I'm setting the alignment of that to be positioned in the center. That'll be vertically centered and horizontally centered. It just looks nice that way. Okay, what else do I need to do? Oh, I want to make sure I have the font that I like for the buttons. I find a nice sans serif font looks best when the numbers are going to be kind of small like they are. So I'm setting my font to Verdana. I need it to be a small size, so I picked size 10, and that just fit nicely. Originally, I experimented around with slightly different sizes until I found something that I liked. And here's another property of a button that you can change that's just going to work well for this program. set focus traversable. Essentially, what that means is within a Windows program, you sometimes have one particular button that's been highlighted to be displayed. None of these buttons will be able to be set to be highlighted for display. So I'm setting the focus traversable property of each one of these buttons to be false. That way, the person's not going to move around and bump the buttons accidentally with their keyboard. It's going to have to be mouse input onto these buttons. Most of the properties of each button that I want to set up. And so now what I need to do is to add that button that I've just created onto the grid. So remember, I called my grid pane grid. And so I'm going to go grid dot add the button that I just made. So I'm going to Minefield buttons, column and row. And the second and third argument for the grid add method are where on the grid that's supposed to appear. You can see that Eclipse has already anticipated that I want it to appear at the same location on the grid, column and row, that I'm referencing in the array from the Minefield buttons. So it's going to kind of match up if it's location third column, fourth row in my array, it will also be on the grid, third column, fourth row. And that'll just help me to keep things all straight in my brain about what button in the array am I talking about and where is it actually on the screen. Right, now that I have created all of the buttons by making them into new buttons and setting up all of the styling stuff that I want to style right now for them, and then added them to my grid, the last thing I need to do is to take care of putting these three things together, the title label, the new game button, and the grid, putting those three things together and then getting them onto the screen. Now, the way that I'm going to put the three of them together is with another new layout managing item that's called a V box, and V just stands for vertical. So a vertical box. I'm going to make a vertical box to hold the three items that I want to be on my screen. I'm just going to refer to that vertical box as being root. It's the main setup or layout for my screen. And I need to make it into a new V box. And that V box is going to be holding my three things, my title. Now, the title is at the top of the screen, the grid is in the middle of the screen, and the new game button is at the bottom of the screen. So I'll put them in that order, and that's how they'll be displayed in that vertical box. A couple of settings to the vertical box just to make it look a little bit nicer. I'm going to set some padding to it. Now, the padding is the space around the outside of the vertical box. If I didn't put any padding here, it would reach right to the very edge of the window. And so that would put my grid of Minefield buttons right on the very edge of the window. Doesn't look the greatest, so I'm just going to make a little bit of space by making new insets for padding and putting them 20 pixels in from the edge of the screen. Right, and then the second thing that I want to set up about this is I want to set some spacing. If I don't make any spacing, then it doesn't leave any room between the new game button, for example, and the whole grid of buttons, and that wouldn't look very good either. I want to have a little bit of spacing in between the items that are in my vertical box. And I just played around with it and found that 10 pixels kind of looked nice as the amount of space in between the different elements in my vertical box. And then the last thing is, how do I want things to be aligned within the vertical box? The grid is obviously much bigger than the new game button. So do I want everything aligned to the left? Do I want everything aligned to the right? Actually, I'd kind of like everything to be aligned in the center. So I'll do that as well. All right, once I have that vertical box set up, that's my main screen because it's holding everything now, right? So now I want to make my scene out of that layout manager. So I'm going to make a scene. I'm just going to call it SCN for lack of a better name. And I'm going to go new scene based on the box root. Now, in previous times, what we've done is we've put a size beside that. So how many pixels wide and how many pixels tall do you want your screen to be? You can still do that. If you don't put a size on, it just sizes the window the same size as this vertical box that I've called root. Right? It'll just make it the same size as that scene or that display that we've created. Instead of having to try to guess the right size and then center things on the screen and whatever else, right? Now I'm going to go to my primary stage and I'm going to set that scene on the stage. And I'm going to put a title for this primary stage because I want it to look nice. So my title is going to be Minesweeper. And that's it. Now I can show the stage. A couple more imports to make. I need to import scene. I need to import insets. Make sure that you grab the Java FX insets, not the Java AWT. Java FX insets. I think that's everything. Now, in testing my program earlier, I had changed my main method. It didn't say launch anymore, so I just want to go back and make sure that that does actually say launch so that it launches the Java FX platform. You can put args there or not put args there. It doesn't really matter. So now it's going to launch my Java FX screen and bring up the Minesweeper layout that I have just created. And hopefully I've done everything right when I run the program. And there's the Minesweeper layout that I created. Now, of course, it doesn't do anything yet. We're going to get to that in the next video. But the layout is there, and programming the buttons to do what they're supposed to do won't take very long after that.